There we go. All right. So, and now I would like to introduce Anna Dunwoodie, our guest speaker of the day. She lives in New Zealand, beautiful New Zealand, where it is 9 a.m. tomorrow morning for most of us. She has a performance degree in harp and a diploma in classroom teaching and children's literature. Her website is annadunwoodie.co.nz. And I urge you to look at her website. She'll have downloads from this Zoom meeting. And she has a lot of publications. And so she's got so much experience and so many students. And she was just out of the blue, I thought, I'm going to text her and see if she will do this. And she said, yes. So I'm so happy. So I am now going to turn this meeting over to Anna Dunwoodie. With the first question, sorry, being, what books do you use when you start students out?
Thank you very much, Mary. It's really lovely to be here and lovely to see some familiar faces. I'm all the way over here in Auckland, New Zealand, and my background was that I started harping in the late 80s, and there were very few harpists in New Zealand. I was one of a handful of young harpists starting at that time, and the scene has grown and grown since then. So it's it's a thriving harp community now, and it's really lovely to be a part in. But I used to read the American harp journals and the folk harp journals and the UK Harp Association journals, and just was so envious of everything that was going on around the world. And it's nice now to sorry, Mary, I just changed your view because I got put off looking at me. I just have to change it back again.
I didn't notice anything.
Oh, okay. Or maybe it was just on my screen. It's very off-putting looking at yourself talking, actually. Anyway, so Mary's asked me to talk about some teaching tips. Now, I have to say that these are just pieces of the puzzle. There's no hard and fast way to teach any one student or any one way of doing it that will work with one student and, well, all of them. Because there's no two beginners that are alike. They don't look the same, their bodies aren't built the same as each other, their brains don't work the same, and most importantly, their attitude towards learning isn't the same. Some are there because their parents would like them to learn the harp, and others are there because since they were very young, they decided that they wanted to play the harp. And I've even taught identical twins, only to find that they were very different in their learning styles as well. And I had to have two different ways of working with them. So I'm just going to screen share some bits and pieces with you. So this is where I start my teaching. This is lesson 1. Starting the harp. And we just go through colours of the strings, a few simple tunes, no notation to start with. I get them doing a glissando and harp claps. Now, I'm just going to lower my screen so you can see me doing my harp claps. Hopefully you don't get to see my fur-covered legs from my fur babies. And these are our harp claps. Just getting them to open and shut their hands, not the little muscles up here, but the big muscles down there. So I get them to lie their elbow on their leg and open and shut their hand from there and see if they can get a clap. And that's something that they can do in the car to and from their harp lessons or at any time of the day. By the end of the lesson, our worksheet is looking a little bit more like this, with colours and other annotations. Now, this is one of the first books that I use, Step by Step by Suzanne Balderston. And I use this with the children. They love the bears in the pictures on the music, and the pace of the lessons is really great too. Another book that I use is Bonnie Moore's Colourful Adventures on the Harp, with both adults and children. And that's fun because it's got the coloured notes in it as well. I only tend to use up to page 12 or 15 because it suddenly starts moving pretty quickly. So then I need more repertoire, and a prolific composer and arranger, so I went my own way then. And I've been writing a lot of beginner music. This is one of my books, Noises in the Attic, with artwork by my nephew Connor. So there's several pages of just right hand or left hand bass or treble pieces, and these are all named after sweets, and particularly some New Zealand things like hokey pokey, chocolate fish. They actually have no relation to the rhythms or anything like that in the pieces, they were just for fun. Then we have some two-handed music. And by the end of the book, they're playing at a late beginner level. This was another book I wrote, which is really more performance pieces, something that they could play at a school performance or talent competition or something like that. And really for younger children. So I've never been able to use just one book or one method. I always say my concentration span's too short to stick to one thing. So I pick and choose my music from lots of different sources. And it depends on what the student likes or doesn't like. Another series of books called Harp Moments, and they're for the late beginner to early intermediates. And there's more Harp Moments books coming out this year. And I really push ensemble music with my students. I play a lot with them myself. And the beginner ensemble books, Begins, have 3 different versions of each piece of music. So part 1 is pretty straightforward. They could just play the right hand if they wanted to. Part 2 is a little bit more challenging, often more left hand than there are some chords. And part 3 is more challenging again, but it will sometimes be an independent accompaniment part. And they're designed to be all played together, and then the student moves up through the parts as they develop and progress in their own harping. And ultimately, it really meant that I didn't need to keep reinventing the wheel and keep writing and arranging new music for them to be playing together. They could just move up and play different parts as they felt comfortable and gain confidence. So those are some of the resources that I use with my beginner students. Other books that I use, and I've deliberately tried to choose books that aren't necessarily from America, because I thought this would probably be a lot of Americans attending. So I use this is the Trinity College Studies and Exercises book, and I have a screen share for what the inside of this one looks like. But I've just realized I forgot to tag it, so I'm just going to go and find this one.
While you're looking for that, I don't know, can you all hear me? I have used the beginning ensemble music for a high school ensemble group and it's the only thing that they could play. It was the only thing that they could really grasp, because they were all violin players. And so they couldn't read the bass clef, and really they couldn't even read the treble clef, truly. For them, when they saw an E, it meant open top string on the violin. They didn't recognize it as an E. So that's why they could play your music, because it was easy enough for them to grasp.
Fantastic, thank you. That's great feedback. Okay, so I've done some screenshots of the inside of this book because I use this all the time. And I have to say, we do use Trinity College and Royal Schools examinations here in New Zealand. I love the layout of exams and the structure that it gives my students. So initial is pre-grade 1, and these are just the exercises. Oh, hang on, I'm not screen sharing yet, am I? Let's just try screen sharing. Where did that one go?
So what is it, is the Trinity College, it's the Royal School of Music, right? And they are pieces that are very structured. How many levels are there?
So there's 9 levels effectively, because it's grade initial grade to grade 8. And initial is the pre-grade 1 warm-up, really, for beginner students. So here we go. This is, what have I just done there? Can you see that with the swinging in the first example?
Yes.
Yep. So these are the warm-up exercises for initial grade. I'll just keep scrolling through. And then there's, for the exam, you do either 3 exercises and the scales and arpeggios, or 3 studies. So these are the initial grade studies, and they've each got specific things. They're quite chord-based at this level, but you can see here that they have in a grand event, there are triplets running through the hands, so that gets the arpeggio practice. There's a few glissandos, and neat pairs down the bottom here focuses on getting a nice legato effect. Then these are the grade 1 exercises, so for turning over and under and different dynamics as you play them. Or the third exercise is playing scales in one hand. Then there's the studies at the grade 1 level. I've just given an example of some of the studies that are available there. And grade 2 exercises. So they're starting to get a bit more complicated now. And I love Chinese kites playing that, because the kids get a real buzz out of setting their levers with 3 flats and 4 sharps. So it's the absolute opposite way around of setting a harp that's normally an E flat. So all your flat levers are down, B's, E's and A's are down, and F's, C's, G's and D's are up. And the kids just can't get their heads around that to start with. So it's quite fun to teach that one. And it's got a beautiful pentatonic sound to it. So that's just a little snippet from the Trinity College Studies and Exercises book, and that's available on the book depository. I find that's the easiest way to get that book.
And who wrote these exercises? Are they by various composers?
No, they were written by Danielle Perrott in 2012 and 2013. And ironically, she was actually out here in New Zealand examining, because she was a Trinity College examiner at the time she wrote them, and was examining through the day and then back to her hotel room at night to frantically try and make good, productive, creative and technical little pieces of music that could be used in the syllabus.
So we have questions. What is the book depository?
The book depository is an online bookshop. I presumed it was in America. I don't know. There's no postage charged on books from the book depository, so it makes it very much more economical to buy music like that that's produced in England over here in New Zealand through the book depository.
We will look into that. What was the other question? Someone had an, oh no, we don't sell that book at Melodies. No, because I'm not even aware of that book. So there we go. And sometimes it's very, very pricey to sell books that we have to order from England. It's just cost prohibitive to sell books like that. So, but I'll look into this, because these look like very good exercises.
Yeah, well, I didn't screenshot the end of the book, which because I was only talking about beginner music, but so this is a grade 7 piece of music. So it's double harmonics. This is a grade 8 piece of music. So you tune and changing the levers with your left hand while your right hand plays the accompaniment. So there's some really challenging stuff that, well, my students really like it actually. If you've got to do technical work, it's quite nice to have it laid out. They can see easily where they've come from at grade 1, 2, 3, right the way up to grade 6, 7, 8, all in one book, and they really like that.
Cindy Shellhart had a question. What's the difference between the Trinity and the AB Royal School of Music, ABRSM?
I don't know that there's any great differences for me as a teacher. Anna, you might be able to help me out there, because we just do them from afar. As far as I'm aware, as a child, I sat both Trinity exams and Royal Schools exams on piano, and they set the syllabus. The Trinity syllabus is much bigger. There's more variety of music than there is in the Royal Schools syllabus, and they aim to change it every 3 or 4 years to make sure it's keeping up with the times. And yeah, I don't know. Hannah Christensen, can you help me out?
Yeah, I would say a lot of teachers here are actually changing to Trinity just because of that issue with the syllabus, because the Harp syllabus for ABRSM, it's been the same since I ever started teaching here practically. And also, I mean, there's been a lot of issues over the time of the pandemic and things with them moving to online examining and things, and there's been huge issues with the marking standards and what people have been expected. I'm on quite a few music teacher groups, not just Harp, but loads. And so a lot of people have actually been very unhappy at the service that they've received, which has been a shame. But I think it's always been that ABRSM has been very formal and slightly more old-fashioned. So they've been kind of dragged into places where other countries and Trinity have been ahead of them. And so a lot of people are finding that Trinity is much more flexible for the exams, and there's a lot more jazzy music. I rented a harp to somebody who was coming over from France to do her Trinity exam, and she was playing some jazz music, and I think the kids, they can even compose their own music, can't they, in the exam? Yeah, so it's a lot more sort of free and flexible and forward thinking. Oh, and also they got the report on the day as well. They got the result as they left the room, then they got the report I think the same day. So I think Trinity is perhaps, I don't know, I mean, ABRSM is just traditional and it's kind of like the gold standard for exams, but I think they've been kind of left behind a bit now. And I think maybe Trinity is got more options, you know, suits more people probably.
Thank you, Anna. We didn't even know that, but thank you so much.
So I also use, I collect syllabuses from exams and examination schools, because I love looking at the repertoire that they have. And so there's exam schools in Scotland and Ireland too, and Canada, and there's one other that I can't think of off the top of my head at the moment. But they make for really interesting reading when you're looking at what level is that repertoire. And when you find a piece of music that's in several exam syllabuses and look at the techniques in it, and you sort of think, yeah, that's going to be great for that level of student.
There's an Australian board as well, isn't there?
Yeah, Australian board.
Yeah,
that's
yeah, well, I think there are several different ones within England as well. I think there's a London College of Music or something, and several other ones that are now doing their exams. Yeah, and I think there's more than one Australian one as well, isn't there?
Yeah, New Zealand Examination Board as well, and a friend and I were asked to write the syllabus for that a few years ago, but it never flew. So I have an amazing syllabus for our New Zealand Harp exams, but no vehicle to use it.
Right, so there isn't a New Zealand examining step.
There's a New Zealand Examination Board, and they do piano and violin and the more common instruments, but not harp.
Right. Time to start.
Yes.
So, Anna, do you have anything more to say about the repertoire at this time?
I love the books of Fiona Clifton-Welker, a UK harp teacher and composer, and Danielle Perrott, who I mentioned. She wrote the Trinity Harp syllabus. And I was going to say, one of the reasons that I was exclusively using Trinity College was that Danielle was such an amazing help to me when I was starting out teaching, and lots of fantastic advice. And if I looked at some music and thought, why is that in the grade 2 syllabus? I'd just email her and say, Danielle, how does this fit into here? What am I actually looking for to get out of this piece of music for this student? I've got Lift Off the Harp, that's by Danielle Perrott. It gets used so often, it's even its own plastic cover. And for the more advanced students, there is the Lever Harp 2000, and there's another Danielle book called Lever Harp World. So they are quite a bit more advanced. Now, these are pieces that Danielle commissioned by other composers, specifically to be used because there were gaps in the more advanced harp syllabuses for the exam. I love the music of Sue Rothstein. She has some really great fun pieces, and the students really love these. The magical animals are things like Danny's Dragon and Unicorn and Fairy, and they're lovely creative pieces. And her pieces go from initial grade 1 beginners, right the way through to advanced pieces. That's Fiona Clifton-Welker's first harping on book 1, and there's book 2 as well, and another series called Sparks from the Harp. And they're really neat. I'll show you some pieces out of hers later on. I love the works of Amanda Whiting, the jazz harpist. Now, the Purple Book's been really, really good fun to work through with students who say, I don't know anything about jazz. How do I play jazz? And Amanda has really useful pieces of information about the beginning stages of jazz and how to make it work for you when you've been a classical musician and have sort of a bit of a mind block on how to move over to jazz. I love the works of Bernard Andres, and I know Melodies has these musics available, don't they, Mary? Yep.
Yes.
And they are from quite early beginner right the way up to very, very tricky and challenging and rhythmically amazing. I think Bernard Andres is probably my all-time favourite composer for the harp. I'll probably tell you something different by the end of this talk as well. And Skylar Kanga's Minstrel's Gallery and Minstrel's Holiday. And I've also been using a special call out, Anna Christensen's music, which I haven't got printed out here, but Anna's written some great pieces for beginners right the way through, particularly over the lockdowns. It's been a great time for getting new music out there.
Okay, well, great. Is there anything else you want to add to the repertoire? And I'll get a list from you and I'll do a follow-up so that everyone knows how to spell these composers, and someone, and I can't remember who, I'm sorry, wanted to order a case and share it here. And I think that's not a bad idea. Who was the one that said that? Let me see if I can see. Order a case, I don't know, but oh, that was Tamara Kazmerzak. Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yep.
I like that. Yep. I'll look into that.
So I've actually got it all written out for you. This is going to be on my website, on the first page of my website. If you want to go right down to the very bottom, I've just pre-seeded some of the stuff that I'm talking about today.
But then I don't have to do the work. You've done the work already. Thank you. So the next question is, how do you teach rhythm, especially dotted quarter notes, which you call crotchets, right?
Dotted crotchets, yes. Okay, so I'll share my screen again with you on some rhythm. Let's get rid of that one. There we go. Okay, so this is just a normally a blank sheet when I start, and I get the coloured pencils out. And this isn't the first lesson plan necessarily. Often I'll start with a whole beat note at the start. Is that what you call it? A 4-beat note at the start. So one note in the first box, and let them know that that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 2 half notes at 1 and 3 in the next box. 1, 2, 3, 4. And through lots of practice of that, we get down to dotted notes. And bringing it back to their music and what they are playing. I'm just going to move on from this one. Where's the next one? Oh, okay. So then I also use my fruit salad idea, this page over here. So we might, for the first few lessons, only use the first 2 fruits there. But I give them the whole page because I'm always really interested to know what's coming up in the fruit salad. So triplets, semiquavers, and the other rhythms don't happen till much further along the way. But I get people walking around the room going, pear, pear, apple, pear, and all these sorts of things. And then a year later, they might be going, oh, I'm really struggling with semiquavers. So we go, watermelon, watermelon, watermelon as we walk, or kiwi fruit, strawberry, kiwi fruit, strawberry, and these sorts of things. So those are the straight rhythms. Now I just want to go to, there's my cozy in bed page. Okay, this is a piece by Danielle Perrett and David Goff. And I end up using words again to help with rhythms. So this is cozy in bed, cozy in bed, snuggled and cuddled and cozy in bed. And they get it with words. And they get it with feeling and walking and clapping the rhythms as well. I just want to go back to this page here, Skaters. This is out of Fiona Clifton Welker's Harping On Book 1. And I was reminded of this the other day because I've got a little 9-year-old student who has learning difficulties. And we had the apple pear thing going fine, but she couldn't get the rest at the end of the bar. So it became apple pear, shh, apple pear, and doing actually a something on the rest. So she could sit there and play. Just get my beastie out. Apple pear, shh, apple pear, shh. And learn the rhythm that way. So yeah, putting words in with actions too, I think is really helpful in learning rhythms.
Okay, should we move on to the next question, or do you have any more on rhythm?
That's probably it on rhythm from me, because I do a lot of repetition of that stuff, and with whatever they're working, whatever music they've got in front of them, we'll work with that.
Okay, you know, I'm finding that with the piano students, you would think that they, you know, the song, My Country 'Tis of Thee, you would think that they would all know that song. They don't know that song anymore. So many of the folk songs that we learned as kids, where we learned our dotted rhythms and certain rhythm patterns, they don't teach that music to the kids anymore.
No.
So even if you want to teach a simple 1-4-5 chord progression, they don't know some of those easy folk songs because they've never heard of them. They're not being taught those. And I just find that very, very bothersome.
That's really interesting, because back in 2001, 2002, I did a diploma of children's literature, and my final research assignment was on whether children actually knew nursery rhymes, and the way that I did when I was a child. And so I went into lots of daycares and kindergartens, preschools, and the first couple of years of primary school, and did lots of singing with the kids to see if they knew the nursery rhymes, the common folk songs that I grew up with. Now, our culture here has changed. We've got many, many, many more immigrants living in New Zealand now. And we found that actually 90% of children didn't know the songs that were very, very common for me as a child. And the songs that also helped to structure a lot of your learning along the way, whether they were moral lessons or things that you could use in other parts of education, they were gone. But these kids had other ones that they were bringing in from all their different cultures as well. And it was time that we actually started changing what we used as the foundation for our learning.
Yeah, it's sad when all of those wonderful songs are no longer used.
Yeah. It's a little bit the same with Christmas carols and holiday music. How many kids don't know the ones that aren't commonly played at your mall, at your local shopping centre? And I've actually put on this handout, which you can collect from my website, there is a little section of my favorite Christmas and holiday music books, because I think it's so important. And so as a teacher, I teach them the common ones, and I try to stay away from the very commercial ones, Frosty the Snowman, things like that, to teach them the more traditional ones. But then we also look into some of the very old French and Polish and other European Christmas songs around. And the kids particularly are really hilarious. They all go, oh, no, I don't really like that one. And I still keep teaching them little by little. And then the next year they're like, oh, that's my favorite carol of all time, just because they've got the familiarity with it. It's not so strange and different anymore. So we have to keep pushing the old traditions from lots and lots of different traditions in different countries and different times.
I agree, to be multicultural. We had two questions. One question was, do you teach any rhythm? Do you have any experience with autistic children, teaching rhythm to autistic children? And then before I forget, I'll ask the other question. It was Shoban. She was saying that in Suzuki, at age 3, the parents and children are taught all those nursery rhymes. So they have that as a backup, as a background.
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. What was the first question? Oh, teaching autistic children. Labels are quite hard, aren't they? I've had several parents who have brought children to me and not given me all the information that would have been helpful to have about the child as you start out on lessons. So, you know, in lesson 3, when they have a meltdown and won't talk to you, suddenly going, there's something more happening behind the scenes here. I haven't specifically taught autistic children. I've taught a lot of Asperger's children, strangely enough, because they have been drawn to the sound and drawn to the kinesthetic sort of running their fingers over the strings type thing. And I've taught a lot of dyslexic kids too, which is really ironic because both of my boys are dyslexic, and I found that out when they were both 7. They're 16 and 18 now, and the oldest one, who I thought was lazy at age 7, I had to completely review my way of dealing with him and realize that he was not lazy, he was having a hard time processing, and I needed to make things more Jamie friendly in everything we did. And when I did that, his frustration level dialed down over other things, and I hadn't even realized there was a correlation between what was happening in his head and what he was putting out 2 hours later. So it was a really interesting time for me, particularly as before he was born, I was working in a special education unit, dealing mostly with dyslexic children and kids who just couldn't get their thoughts onto paper. So I then went and bred 2 of my own just to make life more interesting. And when I was working with my boys and realizing that they were 2 very different dyslexics, I realized that, you know, just nothing is going to work the same for everybody. So I had to be very open with my ideas of how to work with that student. And if it wasn't working with them, we had to sit back and find another way to try and make it work with them. And with dyslexic students particularly, and we already know that B's and D's can be hugely confusing to them, and P's and Q's and 6's and 9's, because basically they're all a ball and a stick. And it doesn't matter where you put it or what the ball and stick looks like on which side. It's just a ball and a stick to them. And so translate that to music, which is balls and sticks up and down on different lines. And some of them are hollow and some of them have no sticks and some of them have little tails. It's quite amazing actually that they can get through this music thing and still survive at the other end with their everything intact. That both my boys are very musical, but they tend to use the ear far more strongly than any other sort of aspect. Practice is not their forte. Winging it is their forte, and sitting around and having a good old family jam where we're all sitting with guitars and singing is their idea of making music. So that also translated over to my students, who loved coming in for their lessons, but they didn't enjoy practicing at home. And we have to realize sometimes that that's okay too, that coming in and having a really great lesson and making some really great music in that time with you as the teacher might be the best thing that happens to them in their music through the week. And that's okay. They're not all going to be symphony orchestra harpists, or they mightn't carry on with harp. They might end up on another instrument later on, and that's okay, because we've given them a really good foundation and fun and practical music making. So
Yeah,
one thing I did do is I decided that if dyslexics needed extra help, like coloured notes, I would colour all the reds, all the C's red, all the F's blue, and we went for green for G as well. So in our music, because we often start in the key of C, we've got our F's, C's and G's, our green G's coloured as well, just to help them out, because they're often our first bass notes and things. Or if there's a handful of a mini scale going down from C, you'll end up on the G, which can be green, so they know where to stop. And it doesn't seem to matter to them that there is actually no green string. It's just that idea of, well, I know what that note is, and of course, green for G. And sometimes I do yellow for E, egg yolk yellow. We talk about that one. And I had a very dyslexic girl whose parents were totally in denial, and they were very good friends of ours as well. But no, Sasha wasn't dyslexic, but she had the worst B and D confusion of any child, even my boys, who were very B and D confused. And she would double guess herself all the time when she went to put her finger on the B. Was it a B or a D? Was it a B? And by the time, she was just about a nervous wreck by the time she decided which string to play. So on her B strings, right up the top, we drew a couple of little black stripes, so they were her buzzy bees, and that solved the problem completely. She was still second guessing about some of the notes on the stave, on the notation, but she knew which her B string was, and she knew that her D didn't have buzzy bee lines on it. So anything like that that we can give the kids, particularly the kids, the adults use it too, ways to, little signposts to make that journey a bit easier. Anything like that, I'm happy to help them find ways to make it easier.
Okay, well, thank you. We have two more questions that we'd like to get through before our hour is up. We don't have that much time left, but if we could devote, 8 minutes to one and 8 minutes to the other, that would be great. But how do you teach sight reading, especially to adults? And then the next question is how to get a relaxed hand position, how to correct a hand position and get it relaxed. If you could address those two, that would be wonderful.
Okay, I'll do the hand position one too, because the sight reading one I'm going to screen share with you. So on the notes that are on my website, you'll see I've got harp claps. I've just written a few words. So they're the ones where I lie my arm down on my knee. Also with kids, we talk about having zombie arms. So our zombie arms don't mean that our wrists fall there. I've told them that they're very correct zombies, and their wrists are actually straight and their fingers are falling off the ends of their hands. So I talk about the hand, particularly for kids, as being the magic carpet. And it brings the little worker bees, which are the fingers, up to the strings. So as they're sitting at their harp, the hand brings the fingers to the strings. Okay, we don't play the harp with our hands, because that would be something like that, which just doesn't make any sort of sound for me. We play it with our fingers. So the magic carpet is what brings the worker bees to the strings, and then they can play from there. Now, they're not allowed to tip their magic carpet over, because magic carpets don't work that way. Okay, they only work when they're flat, otherwise everybody would fall off. So I found that works quite well with young people. And then with adults, I talk about the energy coming from our muscles that are in our torso, not necessarily the muscles that are in the arms so much. And they've got to have a straight fuel line where the energy can come up, down the arms, and then be presented for the magic carpet workers to work there. Now, if their arms are leaning too much on the soundboard and things like that, they've actually put a lot of kinks in the fuel line, which makes it harder for the fuel to get to where it needs to be. And adults understand that much more easily than kids do. The magic hands works, magic carpet works for the kids, whereas the thinking about where your energy is coming from and how to get it to the fingers which need it without any kinks and bends and quirks in the fuel line is a good one for adults to work with. I'm just going to screen share something for sight reading. So,
What about the crocodile?
oh yeah, the crocodile. Yeah, okay. Hang on. So this was this crocodile doesn't have to come out too often, but he was particularly for an Asperger's student of mine who started when she was about 7, and now at 23 she's still having lessons. We still drive each other crazy once a week, actually twice a week. And this is actually her crocodile that she left with me because she hates him. And so the crocodile only came out when I needed to remind her that she needed to have nice straight wrists, because he doesn't stay on your wrist if you're not doing a nice straight wrist. We started this idea of, you know, balancing something on your wrist or on your hand with a little car. But of course, that wasn't so good when it fell and headed towards your harp. So it was really good to have something that's nice and soft and quirky. But yeah, Odyssey left this with me because she hates him. She thought he might be good for other students. While we're on quirky things, I showed this to Mary yesterday. We had a ensemble weekend where we were having to do lots of xylophonics. Now this is just a lump of wood that's been nicely shaped, and it's got a piece of foam across the top. And the foam is, or here we use it for draft stop. Like if you've got a drafty window that bangs or something like that, it's got adhesive on the underside that attaches it to the wood, but it's not at all sticky on the top. And so we were able to use this to push it in and create our xylophonics. And we didn't want to have to get our hand in and out there. It was much easier to move the stop, the dampener stop, up and down the harp. So Mary and I were just sort of talking about little quirky things that we do in our teaching. that one came out. Okay, so I'm going to screen share with you now. Sight readings. I'd like to say sight reading became a passion, but this ended up as a bit of a killjoy actually to do with sight reading, because we spent years and years writing sight reading books, and I have 4 books available now, and these are just the parameters. So what we were looking at each level, and I think this is probably where my fascination with exam schools came in, because we looked at a lot of exam music and worked out what was common across the grade. So level 1 is absolute beginners. Level B, by the time you finish level B, that's the sight reading level required for initial grade exam. So a wide range of keys there, even for beginner harpists. Note values, just crotchet, chip, minim, and semibreve, which is your half note, quarter note, and whole note. And then features. So separate hands and a wider range and 8 bars of music. And I'm going to show you some samples of music soon. Level C is the requirements at grade 1, and level D is grade 2. And so across all the books, there's books 2 and 3 as well. Book 3, we wrote, I think there's 60 samples of sight reading in there, or maybe 90, I can't quite remember. And I wrote half of them, and my co-writer Lisa wrote the other half. And I wrote mine for lever harp, she wrote hers for pedal harp, and then we swapped them over, and I rewrote hers for pedal harp, and she rewrote mine for lever harp. And what we found at the end was that it completely changed the difficulty in each piece, because what was challenging for lever harp was not necessarily challenging for pedal harp, and vice versa. And with lever harp, we could have preset levers. You could have a G sharp in one octave and a G natural in the next one, and it might not affect the harpist, you might not have to change anything, but that might mean a pedal change for a pedal harpist. So it was a really interesting voyage that took us, I think it took us 4 years to write the 4 sight reading books between 2006 and 2010. And back in the day, we used to put them in a box and post them over to Mary all those years ago. Now the samples are, so it starts at absolute beginner level. And what I ask my students to do, I actually ask them to do their sight reading at home. I hardly ever check up on them unless they're heading for exams, and they just quietly work their way through this. So they start and they look at the time signature and look at the key signature and make sure they've got a good understanding of those things. Now at this level, it's very straightforward for them, but they're looking at building a practice or a discipline of sight reading. And so they can sit there and read their way through it. In their heads, they'll be going C, 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 D, C. Right, I've got it. And they're not allowed to start playing until they're very sure that they've got it correct. So that is page 1 of book 1. This is the middle page, page 26. So they've gone up quite a big level of difficulty from then. And that looks like, to me, it looks like it's almost grade 1 sight reading, which is still hands separately, but swapping between right hand and left hand. And then this is the very end of the book. This is grade 2 level sight reading. So this bar here is a preset bar, and then the levers don't change throughout the piece.
So I'm just going to interrupt you here because you actually, I'm not familiar with exams in the United States on sight reading. Do we have that, you guys? Because I'm not familiar with that at all. So, but you actually have exams on sight reading.
It's a component in the Trinity and Royal Schools exam. I'm not quite sure about the marks it's worth in Royal Schools, but in Trinity, it's 10% of your exam. And I have to say that I was a slow learner at this, and I only heard this a few years back when I went to a talk by a Trinity College examiner. It makes sense totally, but rhythm is the most important part of our music. And if you can get the rhythm 100% correct in your sight reading, you will get a higher mark in sight reading than you'd get if you got the melody all correct but no rhythm. And when you think about it, when you come back to your own playing and your own music, rhythm is the most important part, getting that right.
It's also really important just to keep going. And that's the biggest thing. You get extra marks for finishing for ABRSM if you don't finish, because so many students, so many kids just abandon halfway when it starts to go wrong. If they've not got the resilience to actually start at the beginning, keep going, get to the end. That's why it's a test, really. I think it's about, it might be 18 marks worth out of 150, I think. Yeah, out of 150. So it's worth doing. It's easy marks if you can sight read.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say that I've never had a child stop partway through when they've been working from these books, because they have plenty of exercises here, plenty of repertoire to practice on, and they know that they have to get to the end. It's no surprise to them when it comes to sight reading, because the poor kids have been lumped with books and books of sight reading right from their very early lessons, and the expectation that you will sight read. So I'm just going to scoot through so that you can see the levels. Now, I just wanted to say here that the start of each chapter looks slightly easier because we take a step back and we add new skills like jumps or syncopation or different time signatures. So it looks a little bit easier, but this is the middle of book 2. And the end of book 2. So that's about grade 5 level. Now you sight read approximately 2 grades lower than the level that you are playing at for your solo pieces. This is sight reading book 3, the lever version. These samples will also be on my website for you to have a look at. That's the middle of book 3, lever. And few more lever changes in the piece there. And then the last one in book 3 for lever. And then the next page is book 3 pedal harp. So I don't know that even page 1 is the same. We've really moved things around. Middle of book 3 pedal harp. And then it does end up with the last one. It's the same in both pieces, both books. So those are the sight reading books.
So what is the process though? I know that a lot of adults have a hard time when they're beginner musicians, they have a hard time reading in the first place, but sight reading is overwhelming for them. And
So
I suppose if they would start at the very beginning, maybe they could work their way through it. But
yeah.
then a lot of adults want immediate gratification also.
Well, in some ways there is immediate gratification because you're like, yay, this first page was easy peasy. So I had a student that started the first book last night and she's playing at a pre-grade 1 level, but she zipped through the first page and I sort of had to say to her, slow down, this is just, it's just a study in sight reading. Once you've done that first one, don't go back and do it again because it's no longer sight reading, but look at it and think, I didn't quite hold that note for as long as I should have, or maybe I could have used better fingering to make that easier. And make some, have some critical ideas about what you've done in that sight reading so that when you move on to something, another piece or the next page, you take that with you and you improve it. And as my co-writer Lisa says, you don't go back to them, you build a bridge and you get over it. Any mistakes you leave in the past, but you try to make sure that you don't make them in your next pieces. So when my students use the book for their exam, if they're doing a grade 5 exam, they'll go back to the start of grade 3 and they'll work their way through. They probably finished in grade 5 last year when they did the exam. But they'll go back to grade 3 so it's easy again. And they'll rebuild those skills to make sure that they're really confident at the sight reading level that they need for the exam so that they're not floundering anywhere. They know what they're doing. They've done the easy stuff and gradually work their way up to the hard stuff again.
Okay, all right. Well, the one of the last question, and I'm not sure if we should have a few questions from the attendees. Of course, it is 4:58. I think maybe if you have questions, put them in the chat box. I am going to keep the chat and have the chat available. But the last question is, what is the difference between adult students, teaching adults and teaching children?
I think children are in the zone to be learning. I think that's the best thing they've got on their side. Whereas adults often arrive at a lesson and they're thinking, oh goodness, I forgot to put milk on the shopping list, or things like that, that the responsibilities that as an adult carries with them from day to day are very different than a child. The child's got their own woes and worries too, but the children are little sponges that are just so used to lapping up your teaching. But I think in some ways they become a bit complacent about their learning too. And if they're not a child who particularly wants to be there themselves, that mum wants them, or they're not having a great day, somebody else wants them to learn, they can gloss over some of the stuff that is really important. Whereas adults, I find often, even if they take one really good thing away from your lesson, that will improve their music or their attitude towards their learning or some aspect. So, I mean, it's hard, isn't it? Because kids and adults are very different and we've got to work with them the best we can. With what they bring into the lesson to us too. Adults I find a lot of adults find it hard to fit their practice in, whereas children are really great at being told this is your practice time, and mum sort of saying, have you done your practice this week? We don't get adults whose mum rings them up and say, have you done your practice today? And as adults, we probably need to set aside the washing and the cleaning and make a priority to do our practice. Make that, you know, something that is good for our soul and good for ourselves, and, you know, some me time in my practice.
Okay, well, just thank you so much. I really do want to respect people's time. It's 1 hour is done. If anyone has any more questions, you know, you can ask me the questions and I will relay them to Anna. But I think we will, and I'll make sure that I save the chat and I'll do a follow-up and make sure that you know where Anna's website is and information about the books. And so I'll do a follow-up and you will hear from me. But thanks very much for coming, and especially thank you, Anna Dunwoodie, all the way from New Zealand, where it's now, what, 10 in the morning tomorrow?
On a sunny, nice morning, yeah.
And it's cold, right? It's cold there?
It's a bit cold. It's about 10 degrees.
Yeah, that's pretty chilly, Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and especially thank you to Anna. And I will, it'll take me a while to sign off because I have to do the chat, but I think that we can say this, thank you all, but this meeting is now ended, and you'll hear from me as a follow-up. And thank you, Anna, again, very much. A round of applause.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you everybody who was here. It's lovely to see you all.
Great insights. Thank you. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop the recording.